We have Mayuresh Joshi as well. Mayuresh, what's your view on some of these sugar-related names? Balrampur Chini?
Afternoon, Nigel. No, again, I think all these companies were in a spot of bother in terms of restrictions, in terms of pricing-related issues as far as their distillery operations were concerned. But as pricing has now become normalized, the expectations in terms of the throughput that is probably expected, specifically from the distillery operations, should be holding them in good stead. Again, I think in terms of raw sugar prices itself, the kind of estimates that one is receiving, specifically in terms of raw sugar output when it comes to Brazil or even Indonesia to a large extent, it probably seems that sugar output might be on the lower side as far as the global demand supply is concerned. And considering the inventory carryover in the Indian context as well for the next sugar season, it seems to be on the lower levels as we speak. So I think things are turning out for the better. Balrampur being one of the largest distillery capacities that you probably have within the sugar makers might probably benefit as all these things probably come into the fore over the next few months.
What about the capital market players, Mayuresh? You know, we did see a big decline in a lot of these stocks, believing that maybe there could be some volume downtick that would come by, etc. BSE, for instance, has corrected about 35% from the top as well. Right now, it's pulling back up around 6% right now. Do you think, some of these capital market plays will come back into fashion, especially after the data that we got from the mutual fund industry today? It's not as bad as it seems.
Afternoon, Mangala. Oh, absolutely. And I think the big picture argument stays with all these players because it's over the next 5 to 10 years, if one really expects the kind of flows, both in terms of SIPs, the addition in terms of demat accounts, and the expectations in terms of transaction processing, I think the entire ecosystem, right, from exchanges to wealth managers to asset management companies to brokers, might continue doing well. In terms of the key macro stat, 5.5% of the asset ownership is in equities as part of household savings, which is absolutely low compared to the global average, and in fact, even in terms of the emerging market average itself. So there is significant amount of growth that can probably come through. But at this juncture, and as we see the placement in terms of our rating and rankings parameters, I think a few of the wealth managers probably look a tad bit better placed, Mangala. Case in point being either HDFC Asset Management Company as a case in point, or Anandarati Wealth Managers. The thesis here is that in expectations of managing wealth per se, and specifically for the private wealth managers, the number of households, specifically in the elite category, might actually double from 8 lakh households to 16 lakh households over the next few years. And that probably gives a larger impetus in terms of all these wealth managers probably coming into focus and foray. So I think a few of the asset management companies to the likes of HDFC, AMC, a few of asset managers per se, like Anandarati, over a medium to longer term might actually do that.
Soon after Bharti Airtel announced that they're tying up with Starlink, even Jio Platforms announced that they too will be tying up. So there is revenue potential and it opens up an additional revenue stream because this will serve areas which hitherto were not connected. So for instance, in areas where the cables, the typical, telecom cables and wires don't reach. So your rural areas where the density is low and therefore it makes less commercial sense. But the way to read it from an analyst and stock market point of view is that it's not going to be a big game changer. It may not, be a big money spinner. One of the reasons is that Starlink is a premium offering. As one of the analysts pointed out, it's priced at $80 per month in the US. Even in a subsidized country like Kenya, that's in Africa, it's priced at $10 per month. In India, the ARPUs hover at about $200, $250. That's $3. For broadband, which is your, home wireless, you pay a little bit more. You'll pay $5. But even then, it's cheaper in India. And India is a very price-sensitive market. Plus, we're not talking about the device cost because in India, if you want Wi-Fi, companies, all the telcos provide that, the fittings free. So that's reason number one. Right? Can it become a mainstream, mode of communication? Unlikely. It's going to be used more by the governments or large enterprises and less so consumers. And secondly, in the immediate term, there is limited impact because one, Starlink hasn't got its licenses yet. Spectrum allocation is also still left. So at least in the near term, nothing really changes. Stock, as I said, opened up in the green but slipped 1.2% by close. Mayuresh Wain on Bharti Airtel. Analysts on the whole are very bullish, and now they're watching out for the dividend prospects as the free cash flow in companies like Bharti Airtel improves because their capex is moderating, and the tariff hikes. But what about Starlink in particular and this particular partnership?
Absolutely, Rima. No, I think you have summed it up perfectly. I think on top of that, the rural market or the unserved market is extremely price sensitive in the Indian context. And therefore, even if you take the base prices that Starlink has offered in regions in Africa, specifically in Nigeria, I think that's the lowest that they've probably offered outside the US. So even if they go lower, I think to match the broadband rates that India has at this juncture, might be a tad bit difficult because the equipment cost itself is significantly higher. And again, looking at technology, I think the expectation in terms of pulling it down below that $10 or $15 mark that they are offering in a few countries in Africa seems to be improbable. Having said that, the kind of pool that is unserved, around 300 million odd households that you probably got, fair estimate suggests that ARPUs for broadband services can anywhere be in the range of 470 to 525 odd rupees. And in a way, if they find a way out, both Starlink, Bharti stroke Jio, in terms of providing these services at a cost which does not hit them in terms of provision of these services, maybe I think the addition in terms of broadband subscribers might aid growth going forward. But nobody on the street is probably penciling that in at this juncture. And therefore, the core growth in terms of the wireless business with ARPU increases is the best case scenario for these telcos. As we see at MarketSmith India, I think the ratings rankings look just fine as we speak. And therefore, anybody holding a stock like Bharti Airtel should continue.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot for that. Mayuresh, what are you making of these names? If you want to look at it as a blessing in disguise, now they have a reason. Go ahead and we have to increase it by 10 to around 12 rupees per bag to pass this through. And then, in fact, that's what could kick off the price increase cycle, which has been missing for many, many months. Your take?
Well, absolutely. I think that can be the base case scenario, Nigel, that can get worked out, because I think the companies are not completely going to absorb this if this does come through. And therefore, I think it's going to be a partial or a full pass through that probably happens in terms of these royalty hikes that take place in terms of the end product prices as well. And that probably gives a base case scenario for the entire industry as well. Obviously, prices have not got increased. There were large expectations that prices per bag across India, across different regions, should so increase once the monsoons are over, but that's really not happened. You've seen some element of input cost stability, but there have been sporadic increases in input costs as well. And therefore, I think this might actually be an excuse for the industry to probably hike prices if these firms probably do it. And obviously, these firms are not going to take a hit. So in my opinion as well, I think the pass-through will happen, and probably the whole industry might have some element of pass-through coming through. Not good from an inflationary point of view, but I think it was a much-needed hike that the industry probably needed.
Technology names, a quick word, and are you a bit concerned? And is there more derating or EPS cuts ahead?
Also, I think a large part of the price damage, Rima, is probably in the price. So to a large extent, the markets are now penciling in that there might be some element of earnings hit that these stocks might take. Now, it really depends in terms of Q4 commentaries on how management are probably perceiving the entire environment that is probably expected to play out, both in terms of North America as well as the European markets. And therefore, I think the Q4 numbers as well as the Q4 commentary is going to be extremely critical for all these stocks under consideration. Any commentary which is a little bit detrimental in terms of order flows, in terms of pricing, in terms of how margins might play out, might actually then pull down earnings and probably derate the sector a tad bit more. But till this point of time, my take is that a large part of the price damage has probably happened. Q4 numbers and commentary is going to be extremely critical for the whole sector.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in.